Every morning since his wife passed, Walter Harland brewed coffee in a rusted percolator, sat on his porch, and watched Greyleaf Ben stir awake. Steam curled lazily above the chipped rim of his favorite mug, the one with the faded trout on the side, while the birds struck up their usual arguments in the pines. A soft breeze nudged the corners of the American flag hanging on his porch, making it flutter against the morning chill. The lawn, neatly trimmed with borders of snapdragons and petunias, glowed in the golden hush of July sunlight. Across the street, Mrs. Lambert adjusted her lawn flamingo while the Jensen twins bickered over who got the last waffle. Radios played faintly through open windows, one station spinning old jazz, another lost in the twang of country. It was the kind of summer morning where time itself seemed reluctant to rush. Walter reached for the garden shears resting near the porch swing, leaning forward with the practiced rhythm of a man who had clipped the same row of marigolds for years. His knees creaked. His flannel robe brushed the wood rail. And then his eyes caught it, something white, folded, slipped under the metal flag of his mailbox. He set down the shears and rose slowly, spine straightening with each careful step toward the gate. The paper was crisp, machine-printed, and officious-looking. As he opened it, the breeze picked up, ruffling the edge as if urging him on. Notice of porch compliance. Dear resident. As part of the continued beautification standards set forth by the Greyleaf Bend Homeowners Association, please be advised that porch decorations, including planters and non-standard furniture, must comply with Section 8C. Walter didn't finish the rest. He folded the notice back with slow, deliberate fingers and held it at his side. For a long moment, he simply stood there, the note fluttering slightly in his grip, as the hum of the town moved past him. He glanced at the flowerbeds. His late wife, June, had picked those ceramic planters out of a church fundraiser 15 years ago. Bright blues and yellows, a little chipped now, but still proudly overflowing with petunias and geraniums. He could almost hear her voice again, teasing him for overwatering. A familiar voice snapped him back. Mr. Walter. Mason, the red-headed boy from 2 houses down, leaned on the fence with a fishing pole half his height. Did rainbow trout really bite better when the clouds are low? Walter smiled gently. They do. But only if you're quiet enough to let them forget you're there. Mason grinned, said something about trying the river again, and bounded off with a wave. Walter watched him go, the lines on his face deepening with something close to longing. By mid-morning, he had dressed in pressed khakis and a flannel shirt, and made his way to the Greyleaf Diner. The door jingled with a soft chime as he stepped into the familiar smell of bacon grease and coffee grounds. The booths were faded red vinyl, cracked in places. Framed photos of fishing contests and high school championships cluttered the walls, mingled with 2 neatly folded military flags in triangular cases. In the corner, the jukebox hummed out Linda Ronstadt. Ernie was already there, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut tight despite his years, a Marine through and through. He slid a buttered toast toward Walter as he sat. Thought you might need a real breakfast, Ernie said. I've got jam at home, Walter replied with a smirk. Raspberry. June made the last batch. They talked for a while, mostly about fishing, Mason's ambitious questions, and how the town's summer parade was shaping up. But then Walter reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the notice. He didn't say anything, just laid it on the table between them. Ernie squinted. Porch compliance? Walter took a bite of toast. Apparently. Ernie huffed. Marilyn's starting up again. Just a friendly reminder, Walter murmured. He paid the bill with a crisp 20, tipped exactly $2, same as always, and stepped back out under the warming sky. The shiny silver SUV appeared just as he turned onto his street. It hummed more than it growled, pristine as a showroom car, the HOA Pride sticker on the rear windshield catching a sliver of sun. Marilyn Culver waved before the window even fully lowered. Walter. Good morning. Her smile was broad, practiced. Marilyn, he said, nodding once. I just wanted to swing by and make sure you got our little note, she said sweetly, glancing toward his porch with a twitch of her nose. We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic. You know how it is. Walter said nothing at first. Then he unfolded the paper again, read a line aloud with the faintest tilt of sarcasm, and looked up. "I got it," he said simply, folding the paper neatly. Her smile tightened. "Lovely. We appreciate your cooperation." He waited until she drove off, the SUV gliding past Mason's house where sidewalk chalk drawings still lingered from yesterday. Then he stepped inside, shoes placed beside the rug like always, and moved to the fridge. The magnet with a Yellowstone elk clicked as he pressed the notice into place. Behind him, Mason's voice came through the screen door. "Are you gonna fight them, Mr. Walter?" A week later, the morning air felt heavier, not from heat, but from quiet eyes behind curtains. Walter sipped his coffee slower that day. The familiar hum of lawnmowers and morning radio chatter had dulled, replaced by a hush that clung to the hedges. Curtains fluttered, then still. A car door shut farther down the street, and a sparrow startled from its perch. Even the flag on his porch seemed to droop differently, as if it, too, had read the notice. The flowers, his late wife's favorite, had begun to wilt, not from forgetfulness but from a quiet act of refusal. The water can remained untouched by the porch rail, where a second folded paper now lay unopened. Walter hadn't moved it. Instead, he watched from his chair as Diane Travers, 2 doors down, stood on her gravel path in a pink bathrobe and slippers, facing a man in khakis and a clipboard. She gestured with wide arms toward her porch, where metal wind chimes tinkled in soft dissonance. The man pointed at them with the indifference of someone checking off inventory. "I've had those chimes for 20 years, Diane's voice rose, brittle with disbelief. "My husband gave them to me." The man said nothing audible, only scribbled something and took a photograph. She crossed her arms, visibly trembling though the air was still. Later at the diner, the same seat by the window, Ernie banged his cane against the floor with a little too much force as he slid into the booth. "They want me to take down my flag pole," he grunted. "Say it's too tall by HOA standards. Can you believe that? A pole. For the American flag." Walter raised an eyebrow, stirred his coffee. "They said it breaks the visual uniformity rule," Ernie mimicked with finger quotes. "You know what breaks visual uniformity? Injustice." A waitress refilled their mugs. Ernie nodded thanks but kept talking, voice a little tighter than usual. "I let it slide when they complained about my deck stain. I let it slide when they sent a warning about my mailbox paint chipping. But this crosses a line." Walter leaned back, his spine pressing into the worn vinyl. "What are you gonna do?" Ernie opened his mouth to reply, but the waitress interrupted, holding up a small leather badge wallet. "Sir, I think you dropped this." His eyes widened as he reached for it. "Damn. That's my core badge. Haven't carried it in years." He turned it over in his hands, quiet for a beat. "Funny how they can't see us anymore unless we're holding proof." Later that afternoon, Walter sat on his porch with a spool of line and an open tackle box beside him. Mason crouched nearby, concentrating with his tongue out as he tried threading the line through the tiny eye of a lure. "You twist it this way," Walter said, guiding his fingers gently. "Then pull tight like a handshake." "Like a handshake?" Mason blinked. "A good one," Walter said. "Firm, but not rude." The boy gave the line a tug. "Hey, Mr. Walter, can grown-ups be bullies too?" Walter didn't answer right away. He looked out toward Diane's porch, where the chimes now lay in a cardboard box. Her lawn gnome had vanished too. Then he turned to Mason. "Sometimes they don't even know they are," he said quietly. "And sometimes they know exactly." Diane arrived around twilight, carrying a small tin covered with a hand towel. "Lemon bars," she said, handing them to Walter. "Too tart. Just like me." He smiled, ushered her to the rocker beside him. "Thanks," he said, taking a bite. "Tastes like summer." She sat for a while, telling him about her husband's favorite fishing spot and how she still talks to him when the house gets too quiet. Then she looked down. "They sent me a formal warning," she said. said the chimes are disruptive to auditory aesthetics. And I'm not the only one. Charlene got one for having a bird feeder. And the Dobsons can't even put their grandson's tricycle on the porch without a threat. Walter listened without interrupting. As the dusk settled, he fetched a dusty shoebox from the hall closet. Inside, a stack of letters tied in blue ribbon. Near the bottom, one envelope had yellowed more than the others. June's handwriting, soft and looping, peeked through. He opened it slowly. Walter, she'd written, don't ever forget how lucky we are to live in a town where people wave even when they're sad. Where you can hear laughter across the fence, and kids play in sprinklers, and someone always has time for coffee. We live in beauty because people are kind, never let that go. He sat a long time after reading it. The sky darkened to navy, and the air cooled again. Mason's flashlight danced in the street as he chased fireflies. A dog barked. Somewhere, a screen door squeaked shut. Walter stood, walked into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. The first notice was still there, next to a postcard from Yellowstone and a faded Polaroid of him and June. He hadn't yet opened the second envelope. He did now. Inside was a formal citation, $200 fine for unregistered porch item. In red ink beneath the typed lines, someone had scrawled, old rocking chair. He looked toward the chair, his father's, its arms worn smooth by memory. He placed the notice gently on the counter and exhaled. On a hot August afternoon, Walter stood at the town clerk's desk with questions, quiet, firm, and curious. The air conditioning unit above the window dripped every few seconds, its struggle against the heat evident in the room's sluggish stillness. The walls were lined with corkboards layered in old flyers, most curling at the corners, some brightly stamped with HOA Community Standards Meeting, mandatory attendance, in red letters. The faint smell of pine filtered through the open door, mixed with a chalky scent of paperwork and toner. Clerk Jen looked up from her keyboard, adjusting her glasses. Well now, Mr. Harland. This is a rare treat, she said, her smile warm with a hint of concern. Walter removed his hat and held it respectfully at his side. I was hoping to ask about these notices. 3 in 2 weeks, and not one of them explains much beyond a fine and a code number. Jen nodded slowly and gestured to a plastic chair that creaked under Walter's weight as he sat. We've had a few folks ask the same, she said, pulling open a drawer. Marilyn runs the HOA tight, and they've gotten more meticulous this year. Walter glanced at the copy of his latest citation. Unregistered porch item. I didn't know I had to register memories. Jen offered a pamphlet titled Oregon Homeowner Association Transparency and Disclosure Laws. Start with this. There's a form in there you can mail to request documentation, meeting minutes, fine justifications, even financial ledgers. They're legally required to respond within 30 days. Walter took the pamphlet, nodded. Appreciate it. As he stood to leave, a printer behind the partition whirred to life. The clerk walked off to help another resident, leaving Walter to glance toward the hum. Noah Bellamy stood at the copier, neatly stacking violation slips. His face turned slightly pale when he noticed Walter. He quickly gathered the papers and turned, but not before Walter caught a glimpse of a name he recognized, Ernie Cunningham, listed next to a violation titled Improper Flag Display, Pole Height Noncompliance. Walter approached slowly. Busy day, Noah. Noah fumbled the papers into a folder. Just catching up. Lot of updates this month. Is that so? Walter's tone remained polite but a notch sharper. These updates, they ever get discussed before they go out? Noah offered a tight smile. You'd have to ask Marilyn. Walter tipped his head. Maybe I will. Noah shuffled away without further word, exiting through the side door. Walter noticed he walked toward the gravel lot, not the HOA-marked parking spots. That evening, Walter visited Diane. Her wind chimes still sat in the cardboard box near the door, now joined by a small stack of legal envelopes. They find me again, she said. Said the hummingbird feeder I hung on the back porch was a potential vermin attractant. They sat on her porch swing, a faint breeze lifting the scent of lemon balm. Diane poured 2 glasses of iced tea. I was thinking, Walter said, what if we start asking questions? Not just reacting. Ask for meeting records. Get folks talking. Diane raised an eyebrow. Think that'll change anything? Maybe not, Walter said, but silence sure hasn't. She leaned back, thoughtful. Ernie would be game. That man's been itching to do something since they marked his driveway paint as non-standard. Tomorrow, Walter said, pie and planning. They met at Ernie's the next afternoon. On the shaded patio Ernie had painted in violation of uniform surface tone regulations. A blackberry pie sat cooling on the table, the recipe passed down from his wife, who once won the county fair with it. This better be a real rebellion if it's costing me my best pie, Ernie joked. Walter shared the pamphlet from Jen, pointing to the form he'd already filled out. It's a start. I'm mailing this today. Ernie chuckled. Old Marines don't retreat, they reorganize. Mason wandered over as they talked, holding a sheet of printer paper with crayon scribbles. Mr. Walter, he said shyly, I made you something. He handed over the paper, a clumsy star badge outlined in red, with Bravest Grandpa scrawled beneath. It's for being brave, Mason explained. Like in the cartoons. Walter's face softened. Thank you, son. I'll wear it where it counts. When he returned home, he placed the boy's badge beside June's old letters on the hall table. Then, with deliberate care, he sealed the envelope containing the formal disclosure request. He walked down to the mailbox, lifted the flag, and stood a moment under the darkening sky before letting the letter go. Miles away, Marilyn Culver sat at her kitchen table surrounded by neat stacks of paperwork and HOA correspondence, each pile marked with sticky notes. Her laptop pinged, new mail. She clicked open the envelope. Her eyes narrowed at the subject line, request for HOA records, ORS 94.640 compliance. She read the name, Walter Harland. Her hand paused on her teacup. The air seemed to shift. So it begins. Walter slid the stack of HOA disclosure papers across Diane's kitchen table, steam from her percolator fogging his glasses. He took them off and wiped the lenses with a cloth from his shirt pocket, nodding a thanks as Diane set a fresh mug beside the stack. The early autumn light streamed through her lace curtains, catching flecks of dust that danced silently in the air. Outside, dry leaves scraped against the porch, carried by a breeze that hinted at colder days ahead. I found 3 homes with identical violations, Walter said, tapping a few pages. Word for word. Even the timestamps are only minutes apart. Diane leaned in. That can't be a coincidence. No, he agreed, it isn't. The papers smelled of ink and faint citrus, maybe from Diane's cleaning spray. Her kitchen was warm with the scent of fresh-baked apple pie, the crust cooling by the window. Ernie sat across from Walter, adjusting his cane beside the chair, his eyes narrowed at the pages. Tell me again about those enforcers, Ernie asked. Walter pulled a sticky note from the folder. 2 of the names listed on the citations aren't on the town's official registry. Jen at the clerk's office confirmed it. They're ghosts. Diane's eyes widened. So Marilyn's got people handing out fines who aren't even authorized? Walter didn't answer, but his brow creased. That alone said enough. A small scratching noise came from the hallway. Mason peeked in, holding a rolled-up paper and a crayon-streaked grin. I made us a map, he announced. It's where we sit when we talk, like battle planning. Walter smiled. A tactical map, huh? I watch cartoons, Mason shrugged. Heroes always have maps. Ernie chuckled, waving the boy in. You're our junior general then. Diane slid a plate of pie slices toward Mason. Generals need fuel. Take a seat. While Mason munched happily, Walter unfolded an anonymous email he had printed. The sender was untraceable, but he recognized the wording. Check section 8.4, Maryland bypassed vote. He read it aloud, and Diane gasped. That's the section on member approval for new policies. Exactly, Walter said. The fine structure she implemented this summer, there's no record of a vote. Which makes it illegal, Ernie finished, thumping his cane on the floor. Walter nodded. Or at least unenforceable. The group grew quiet. Outside, a dog barked, and someone's wind chimes jangled in the breeze, Diane's, likely rehung despite warnings. The sound seemed brighter than usual. I want to propose something, Diane said, wiping her hands on her apron. We hold a coffee talk. Not an official meeting. Just neighbors gathering. Soft, Ernie nodded. Quiet. Walter folded his hands. Where? Here, she said firmly. My place has pie and no HOA bugs. Ernie grinned. And a hell of a percolator. Walter allowed himself a small chuckle. We'll need more than pie. Legal backup. I know someone, Ernie said. Retired JAG. Helped a few vets beat HOA charges in Salem last year. I'll call him. As Mason colored a new corner of his tactical map, Walter leaned in and held up one of the printed citations. Look closely, he said. They all squinted. No serial number, he said. Official violation forms need a reference ID. Diane gasped. It's blank. Walter sat back. We've got our first clear infraction. The group buzzed with cautious hope. Diane passed out more pie, Ernie leaned on a ballpoint pen like it was a gavel, and Mason whispered, Detective Walter strikes again. Twilight fell slowly over Grayleaf Bend. As Walter left Diane's house, a coolness settled in his bones, not from the season, but from the headlights he noticed parked across the street. Later that night, a neighbor knocked on Walter's door, his eyes wary. I saw Marilyn, the man whispered. She was in her car. Around 10. Just sitting. Took a photo of your house before driving off. Marilyn's smile stretched wider than usual as she handed Walter an envelope marked Final Notice. She didn't speak at first, only extended the letter with an exaggerated cheerfulness that made Walter's stomach tighten. Her sunglasses caught the morning light, reflecting the golden leaves behind her. Walter took the envelope without a word and watched her walk back to her shiny SUV, the HOA Pride sticker almost gleaming too proudly on the bumper. Inside, the wording had changed. It no longer cited porch noncompliance or unauthorized decor. This time, the violation was categorized as behavior counter to community governance, a vague, self-important phrase that reeked of overreach. Walter set the letter on the kitchen counter and turned on his radio, letting the faint hum of old country tunes fill the house. He reached for a small folder labeled Barnes Meeting and tucked it under his arm. By noon, the old church hall off Maple Street was already humming with quiet conversation. Coats were draped over folding chairs, and the scent of watery soup mixed with mayonnaise sandwiches lingered in the air. On the makeshift podium, a tall man in bifocals adjusted his papers. Name's Barnes, he said with a voice dipped in molasses and southern gravel. I specialize in HOA overreach cases. And from what I've seen, y'all have a doozy. Ernie muttered, he means Marilyn, and several heads nodded. Walter passed around printed forms labeled Community Response, Legal Inquiry. 15 signatures already adorned the bottom. Diane handed one to a woman in lavender who whispered thanks. The mood in the room was not angry, just tired and ready. Barnes held up a highlighted page. This is your HOA's original charter. According to Oregon's revised statutes, any changes to enforcement structure must be ratified in a public vote. There's no record of that here. A few people murmured. Walter noticed Noah near the back wall, keeping his head low, phone in hand. Their eyes met briefly. Noah didn't speak, but gave a single, slow nod. Here's how we respond, Barnes continued. Legally, you can invoke the HOA clause that requires the HOA to provide full founding documents, unchanged, in original language. Walter stood. I submitted the clause request this morning. Certified mail. A small ripple moved through the room, relief, maybe. Diane reached into her tote and pulled out a sealed envelope. This came today, she said, voice shaky. Says if I don't remove my wind spinner by Friday, they'll report water irregularities to the utilities office. Barnes blinked. That's not only vague, it's probably illegal intimidation. Walters stepped forward. Then let's make this next part public. He laid a copy of his violation notice on the podium, and beside it, photocopies of the exact same notice received by 3 other homeowners. He flipped them, showing missing serial codes, mismatched dates, and a forged signature. Murmurs grew louder. Diane passed around the lemon bars. Ernie leaned on his cane and whispered, "Nice shot, Captain." The tension in the room softened, not gone, but diluted with unity. As people filtered out, Mason tugged at Walter's sleeve. "I made a sign," he said proudly, holding up cardboard painted in crooked blue letters, "Freedom Fishing Zone." He taped it to a stick, waving it like a banner. Walter smiled. "Put it at the gate." Mason saluted and ran off. By dusk, Walter sat on his porch sipping coffee. The rocking chair creaked under him as leaves gathered at the foot of the steps. The sign Mason had posted stood crooked but firm. His radio crackled as an old fiddle tune rolled in, and just before turning in, he checked the HOA's public website. A new post sat pinned to the top. "Walter Harland is undermining our unity. Action will be taken." The morning HOA planned their emergency board meeting. Walter wore his best flannel and clipped his veteran pin back on his collar. He looked at himself in the mirror, wrinkles etched like careful stitches down his jawline, eyes a little wearier than before. But the pin glinted true, and that was enough. Diane's gift, a dark blue tie with faint stripes, hung neatly from his collar. "You'll look like leadership," she'd said. Grayleaf Bend's public library hadn't hosted a community meeting in years, and certainly never one with standing room only. Folding chairs had been arranged in tight rows beneath warm fluorescent lights. A small sign near the door reminded attendees, "All meetings in this room are subject to public recording under municipal law." Walter walked in calmly, thermos in hand. Ernie followed behind, cane tapping in rhythm, holding a second cup of coffee for Diane, who arrived just moments later with a tin of lemon drops and quiet resolve. At the front of the room stood Marilyn, her blonde bob sharp as ever, a sleek laptop open in front of her. Several HOA board members flanked her, stiff, buttoned up, eyes darting. Walter took a seat near the aisle, facing the board. Barnes, the lawyer, sat one row behind, flipping through papers but saying nothing yet. The murmur of the room dimmed as Marilyn tapped her microphone. "We've convened this special meeting," she began, "to address what we believe is a coordinated effort to destabilize our community's order." A few heads tilted. Walter stood slowly. "Before you continue, I'd like to speak." Marilyn stiffened. "This isn't. It's a public forum. Oregon Statute 94.640 requires open member comment." He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. Someone at the back, a woman in a windbreaker, hit record on her phone. Walter pulled a printed copy of the HOA charter from his folder. "This document," he said, "was amended without required voting procedures. Section 3.2 of the original bylaws guaranteed resident voting on enforcement policies. That right was suspended without ballot or notice." Marilyn tried to interrupt again, but this time, a few murmurs broke out. Diane leaned forward and whispered to Ernie, "They're listening." Walter continued. "Furthermore, enforcement fines must be attached to confirmed property code violations filed with the city. These," he held up several notices, "have no legal weight. They're scare tactics." Gasps and uneasy whispers spread. A man in a fleece jacket near the front shifted in his chair, arms now crossed in Marilyn's direction. She leaned into the mic, voice sharper now. "Mr. Harland is not a board member. He's not authorized to interpret our charter." Barnes cleared his throat but didn't rise. Walter didn't move. "I'm just reading what your own documents say." A hush fell. A phone beeped. From the back row, Mason sat wide-eyed beside his mother, a sketchbook in his lap. He was scribbling furiously. After a few tense minutes, Marilyn snapped her laptop shut. "This is no longer productive," she said. "We'll reconvene after formal legal review." Then she added, looking directly at Walter, "And we'll be pursuing litigation against you, for intentional disruption of community operations." The silence was heavy. Walter stared back, unmoved. He turned and walked out, and something in the room shifted. A soft clap echoed behind him, then another. Not loud, not raucous, but steady. A frail hand reached out as he passed. "Mr. Harland," the man said. "We're with you." Outside, Ernie popped open the thermos. "Still warm," he muttered. "Still lucky." Later that evening, as Walter returned home, Mason was waiting near the porch with tape in one hand and a drawing in the other. "I made this," the boy said, shyly. It was a pencil sketch, Walter standing at the front of a room, his pin catching the light. Mason had drawn little stars over the shoulders. Walter smiled and helped him tape it on the fridge. The next morning, among the usual junk mail, an official envelope lay flat on the doormat. "Hearing scheduled, November 9th. Marilyn's voice cracked through the courtroom like a teapot left too long on the burner. "Baseless accusations, Mr. Harland has poisoned this community with lies and confusion," she shouted, gesturing so wildly her bracelet flew halfway up her arm. The judge didn't even look up, just calmly tapped her pen twice on the wood, a warning for decorum. Outside, the gray sky draped itself low over the district courthouse. Inside, the walls seemed to echo every word louder than intended. Rows of townsfolk filled the seats, bundled in sweaters and scarves. Some had even brought blankets. Mason sat between his mother and Diane, sipping tea from a dinosaur thermos. Near the front, Ernie held his rusted veteran badge in his palm, thumb tracing its worn edge. Walter sat quietly beside Barnes, papers neatly stacked. He had brought nothing flashy, just a pocketful of facts, and a tie Diane had ironed that morning. "Your Honor," Barnes began, "we assert that the HOA, under Ms. Culver's direction, has levied fines that violate both state and municipal homeowner statutes. Furthermore, we present this email chain," he held up stapled printouts, "wherein Ms. Culver threatens residents with loss of amenities for non-compliance, a direct breach of fiduciary duty." The judge adjusted her glasses. "These are confirmed?" Barnes nodded. "Verified through ISP metadata and forwarded from 5 separate residents." Marilyn sprang up, almost knocking her chair back. "Those emails were taken out of context." Barnes didn't flinch. "Would you like to read the section where you refer to elderly residents as dead weight?" A collective gasp swept through the room. Marilyn's mouth opened, then shut. She fumbled with her notes. Walter stood. "Your Honor, we also filed a counterclaim citing unlawful withholding of HOA voting rights. Section 3.2 was never voted on, despite changes in enforcement language. I request the court consider that in judgment." Marilyn snapped back. "That's not true. We held a vote." "You fabricated the count," someone called from the gallery. A woman in a red coat stood, holding her phone. "I filmed that meeting." "You had no quorum." Judge Hammond raised a brow. "Order." Barnes stepped forward again. "For further reference, we'd like to present a video from last December's Winter Lights Festival." On screen, projected from a laptop, Marilyn's voice was unmistakable. "If he can't walk to the booth, that's not my problem. We're not lowering standards for sympathy cases." The courtroom went still. A whisper passed through the crowd like wind in brittle leaves. "I remember that," someone muttered. "She said that to Walter's neighbor, he's in a wheelchair." Another voice added, "She made him cry." Marilyn paled. "Enough," she snapped, voice trembling. "I built this neighborhood." She slammed her hand against the table, rattling the microphone. "I gave it order. Without me, it's just porch clutter and yard weeds and..." Judge Hammond's voice cut through the chaos, even and firm. "Miss Culver, this is a courtroom. One more outburst, and you will be removed." Marilyn sat down hard, face flushed. Behind her, the HOA board members looked anywhere but at her. Walter didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The last 20 minutes had done what months of quiet resistance couldn't. The hearing concluded in cool silence. The judge gathered her files, then turned to the room. A decision will be issued in 2 weeks. This court is adjourned. The gavel tapped once. As people began to stand, Mason reached out and slid Ernie's badge back into his hand. Ernie held it to his chest, blinking hard. Diane grasped Walter's hand briefly, steadying him as he trembled from nerves. Outside, the clouds had begun to part. A single band of pale winter sunlight cut through the gray, landing right across the courthouse steps. Walter walked through it with quiet resolve. From the benches nearby, heads nodded. No one clapped. But no one looked away. On Thanksgiving morning, Walter tied a faded red bandana to the tip of his fishing rod. The cloth had belonged to his wife, once used to keep her hair out of her eyes on breezy afternoons by the pond. Now it fluttered gently in the chilled breeze like a small, quiet flag. A thick blanket of mist clung to the pond's edge, softening the outlines of trees and docks, making the world feel hushed and sacred. Walter stood for a long moment near the water, staring at the reflection of the pines, listening to the muffled sounds of townsfolk setting up tables and string lights for the community dinner later that afternoon. Tucked in his jacket pocket was a letter. Not from a lawyer, not from the HOA, but from the courthouse. The final ruling had arrived the day before, quiet and direct. The HOA was dissolved. All unlawfully collected funds would be returned. Records would be turned over to the state. No appeal. Walter had stood in his kitchen and let the moment pass through him like weather, cool, necessary, and deeply satisfying. Then he made a pie. By mid-morning, folding tables lined the edge of the pond, draped in checkered cloths and carrying dishes of roasted turkey, apple compote, collard greens, and too many pumpkin pies to count. Diane moved between groups, ladling soup from a pot she'd been tending since dawn. Ernie stood near the flagpole, running his hand down a length of polished cedar as Noah drilled the last bolt in. There was no HOA flag anymore. Instead, they raised Ernie's Marine Corps badge, enlarged, laminated, and mounted on a plate. Below it, a small engraved line, respect, not control. Walter had been offered leadership in the new neighborhood council. He declined. Give it to the ones who've been quietly brave, he said, nodding toward Diane and a few retired teachers who'd stood by him. My job was just to stir the pond. Later that afternoon, Mason presented him with a wrapped canvas. Walter peeled back the brown paper to reveal a painting, him, sitting by the pond in his flannel, fishing rod balanced on one knee. Above, a blue sky and 3 swallows mid-flight. In the corner, Mason had written in block letters, Freedom Zone. Gonna hang that next to the fridge, Walter said, smiling so gently it wrinkled the corners of his eyes. Diane slipped her arm into his as they strolled the pond's edge. You look lighter, she said. Maybe I am. Took long enough. She chuckled. Winter'll be here soon. I've seen worse ones, Walter replied, glancing at her hand resting on his coat. This one might even be good. As the sun dropped toward the tree line, and golden lights scattered across the lake, Walter, Ernie, and Mason stood before the new flagpole. Walter passed the red bandana from his rod to Mason. Do the honors, he said. Mason tied it neatly, then gave a mock salute. For the porch flowers. And the wind chimes. And the right to fish. They all laughed. Just as the first firework burst, paper confetti from a homemade cannon Mason had rigged, Diane hugged Walter from the side. You did it, she whispered. I just followed her words, Walter replied. Boots on. Truth clean. As twilight fell, the group gathered around the long table. Someone turned on the old radio, and from the small speaker came the dusty warmth of an AM station playing, Take Me Home, Country Roads. Mason leaned close, his voice quiet but clear. Mr. Walter, if someday I'm forced to do something I know is wrong, what should I do? Walter didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the pond, at the flag, at the faces of his neighbors lit by strings of yellow bulbs and bonfire glow. Then stand up, he finally said. But bring apple stew, and the law in your pocket. The breeze at Greyleaf Pond felt different that morning, not just colder, but freer, as if the trees themselves had exhaled. What began as one man's quiet stand turned into a neighborly reckoning, where truth found its voice and community found its courage. When power forgets its purpose, it takes just one steady voice, joined by others, to remind it. Perhaps it's never too late to stand for what's fair, and never too quiet to be heard. Like a red bandana on a fishing pole, even the smallest symbols can mark where freedom begins.